कया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगना रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगना ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नमः। ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे नमो महावदन्याय कृष्ण प्रेम प्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नामने गौरत्वशे नमः। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So we will continue our discussions on the Nectar of Devotion. We were discussing on the second chapter, and essentially we were discussing about sadhana bhakti, the first stages of devotion. So we had discussed the definition of are the slides moving ahead or no?
No, Prabhuji, same problem.
Okay. Is that okay now?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, fine. So we were discussing three types of bhakti: sadhana, bhava, and prema. And then we discussed the eligibility for Krishna consciousness, how a person comes to Krishna consciousness. So what is required essentially is the causeless mercy of a devotee, by which one performs some devotional service and then he gets some agyat sukriti. Because of the agyat sukriti, he develops a slight attraction to bhakti. Because of the attraction, then he performs more service, more attraction. And that's how a devotee progresses on the path of devotional service, and ultimately becomes fixed on the path of devotional service. So, and then we also discussed this verse, Yadrichaya matkatado jata shraddhastu yapuman na nirvinno nati sakto bhakti yoga siddhidaha. So somehow or other, by good fortune, one develops faith in hearing and chanting my glories. And the two qualifications have been described here: neither na nirvinno nati sakto, not too disgusted with material life, then he may take to the process of gyan and aspire for liberation. And nati sakto, not too attached to material life, then he may take to the path of karma and fruitive activity. So if one has these pre-qualifications, then one is a favorable candidate to come to the path of pure devotional service. Yes, then we discuss the definition of sadhana bhakti. Kriti sadhya bhavet sadhya bhavasa sadhana vidha. When transcendental devotional service by which love for Krishna is attained is executed by the senses, it is called sadhana bhakti, or regulative discharge of devotional service. And then we discussed how this is like a child learning to walk. So the capacity to walk is already there in the child, and therefore by practice, he eventually learns to walk. So similarly, Krishna consciousness is inherently present in the heart of every living entity. And the practice by which that innate loving service is awakened is what is basically sadhana bhakti. Yes, we discussed the Swarup Lakshan of sadhana bhakti are Shravan Kirtan and remembering, etc. So these are Swarup Lakshan. So therefore, these activities of Shravanam and Kirtanam are extremely important for the practices of devotional service. So here we saw this lecture. Srila Prabhupada says that is a pushing process because initially one does not have a taste. So therefore, then some pushing by the spiritual master is required. And the essence of sadhana bhakti is tasmad kenapi upayena mana Krishna niveshet. So somehow or other, one must think of Krishna. Of course, one must think of Krishna favorably. That has already been established by the Paribhasha Sutra, Anukulyena. And the best way to remember Krishna is by the chanting of the holy names, especially in this age of Kali Yuga. Two types of sadhana bhakti, that is Vaidhi sadhana and Raganuga sadhana. And this is the definition of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. When there is no attachment or no spontaneous loving service to the Lord, and one is engaged in the service of the Lord simply out of obedience to the order of the spiritual master, or in persons of the scriptures, such obligatory service is called as Vaidhi bhakti. So, yes, we discussed elaborately on what is the meaning of Guru Prasad, Guru Kripa. And so here in this purport, Srila Prabhupada says that the spiritual master trains his disciples to render devotional service under the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is called Guru Kripa. It is Krishna's Prasad, Krishna's mercy that descends upon that spiritual master to the deserving disciple. And so this training one receives is what is basically Guru Kripa. Then we also discussed the meaning of Bhakti Lata Bij, that is the methods, rules, and regulations by which one is perfectly trained in devotional service, constitute the Bhakti Lata Bij or the seed of devotional service. This Bhakti Lata Bij is received from the spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. Okay, and then we saw this as one of the examples of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, that is of Parikshit Maharaj. So because it appears, at least from the perspective of the Leela, that Parikshit Maharaj is afraid of his impending death, and therefore he takes to the practice of hearing and chanting, essentially hearing. Okay, so now we'll proceed ahead. Practice of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. So one of the important principles in the practice of sadhana bhakti, as given in the Padma Puran and quoted by Srila Prabhupada in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and as mentioned by Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, is this very important verse: Smartavya satam Vishnur vismartavyo na jatuchit sarve vidhi nishedasyor etayoreva kinkaraha. Somehow or other, always think of Vishnu without forgetting him under any circumstances. All injunctions and prohibitions are dependent on these two principles. Actually, this is the most basic of all regulative principles. Okay, so all rules and regulations essentially aim to achieve these two important rules and regulations, and that is to always remember Krishna and to never forget him. So that is the goal of all the rules and regulations and the practices of sadhana bhakti. So Jiva Goswami's commentary on this verse: all the rules and prohibitions, sarve vidhi nisheda, means scriptural injunctions such as Ar, Sandhya, Upasita, one must worship daily at the Sandhyas, and Brahmana Hantavya, one should not kill a Brahmana. All these injunctions and prohibitions are dependent, kinkara, on the injunction to remember the Lord always and the prohibition never to forget him. To do the opposite, making remembrance of Vishnu secondary to all the other rules, will yield opposite results. The addition of Chit to Jatu is for emphasizing Jatu Naja. Okay, fine. So basically the point is that all rules and regulations are meant to achieve this, to always remember Krishna, never forget him. If that is not being achieved, then practically the purpose of all rules and regulations is not being served. And Vishwanath Thakur commenting on this verse, he says because all rules are dependent upon remembrance of Vishnu. If one remembers Vishnu, what is instructed in all the rules is accomplished. And because all prohibitions such as killing cows and brahmanas are also included in the rule to remember Vishnu, if one forgets Vishnu, that person should be considered to have accrued unlimited sins produced by committing all the prohibited acts. And it says Satadam means every day, not every second, since continuous remembrance would be impossible to do in sadhana bhakti. This would produce loss of faith in the rules of bhakti because they would be impossible to follow. Okay, so if one remembers Vishnu, then all other rules are accomplished. Okay, so therefore we find that Srila Prabhupada gave great importance to the chanting of the holy names. And so if one is chanting the holy names, then practically all of the rules and regulations are accomplished. We have the famous example of the opening of the Krishna Balram temple in Vrindavan. And though there were traditional brahmanas called to perform fire sacrifice during the installation of the deities and the opening of the temple. And that was basically to satisfy the local people and so that they would not unnecessarily criticize. But Srila Prabhupada very clearly said that the essential installation was taking place by the chanting of the holy names. So that was the most important thing. So because the chanting of the holy names is not different from Krishna. So if one is remembering Krishna, then all of the rules and regulations are automatically accomplished. And therefore we find that Srila Prabhupada gave great importance to the chanting of the holy names, especially in this age. And if that remembrance of Krishna is not there, then one is actually accruing all sinful reactions, because without the remembrance of Krishna, then whatever one is doing actually becomes sinful, because it is not meant for the pleasure of Krishna. Then even an ordinary activity like even eating or breathing, even that leads to sinful reactions, right? Because we are killing so many other living entities at the same time. And so therefore, the remembrance of the Supreme Lord is given great importance. And that is what Krishna is also giving great importance to in the Bhagavad Gita. And that is what Krishna is expecting at the time of death. We have the famous verses in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, 5 and 6. Antakale chamameva smaran muktva kalevaram. So there the word smaran comes, remembrance. And again, the next verse, yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tajda ante kalevaram. And then again in the 7th verse, mam anusmara yudhyacha. Okay, so you find repeatedly again and again, Krishna speaks about smarana. Krishna speaks about remembrance. So therefore, that remembrance of the Supreme Lord and that remembrance while performing our various activities in devotional service is something which is very important. Now, Vishwanath Thakur is being a little compassionate to the sadhakas by saying that the word satatam does not mean every second, but once a day. Why? Because every second, every moment would be very difficult for the sadhakas, and that would discourage them, would lead to a loss of faith in the practice of bhakti. And so therefore he has given us a sort of concession and said, okay, in a day, at least some fixed time during the day, if one can utilize for exclusive remembrance of Krishna, that's good. And that is why we find that Srila Prabhupada gave us that a fixed program where one can exclusively try to remember Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada gave us especially the morning program where we can utilize for exclusive remembrance of Krishna. And then of course, Srila Prabhupada did give us the evening program also with Sandhya Arati, Bhagavad Gita class, Krishna book reading. So, but especially Srila Prabhupada did emphasize on the morning program. And so if we follow the Acharya's instructions to at least utilize certain part of the day for exclusive remembrance of Krishna, then we can expect that by the Acharya's grace and ultimately Krishna's grace, we will be able to remember Krishna during the rest of the day also. Now, Srila Prabhupada is commenting on this verse in his purpose to the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So this is Srila Prabhupada's commentary on this verse, Martavi Satnam Vishnu. So somebody can read this, please.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. This verse is a quotation from Padma Purana. There are many regulative principles in the Shastras and directions given by the spiritual master. These regulative principles should act as servants of the basic principle. That is, one should always remember Krishna and never forget him. This is possible when one chants the Hare Krishna mantra. Therefore, one must strictly chant the Hare Krishna mantra 24 hours daily. One may have other duties to perform under the direction of the spiritual master, but he must first abide by the spiritual master's order to chant a certain number of rounds. In our Krishna consciousness movement, we have recommended that the neophyte chant at least 16 rounds. This chanting of 16 rounds is absolutely necessary if one wants to remember Krishna and not forget him. Of all the regulative principles, the spiritual master's order to chant at least 16 rounds is most essential.
Continue.
Yes, bro. One may sell books or enlist life members or render some other service. But these duties are not ordinary duties. These duties serve as an impetus for remembering Krishna. When one goes with a Sankirtana party or sells books, he naturally remembers that he is going to sell Krishna's books. In this way, he is remembering Krishna. When one goes to enlist a life member, he talks about Krishna and thereby remembers him. Smartavyam satatam Vishnu vismartavyo na jatuchit. The conclusion is that one must act in such a way that he will always remember Krishna, and one must refrain from doing things that make him forget Krishna. These two principles form the basic background of Krishna consciousness. Madhya
Okay.
Leela,
Yes. So we find that Srila Prabhupada is giving a great emphasis to chanting the holy names. And as you can see here, Srila Prabhupada says that he repeats this point, almost 3 sentences here. So first of all, he says one must strictly chant the Hare Krishna mantra 24 hours daily. Okay, and then he says, okay, then he must first abide by the spiritual master's order to chant a certain number of rounds. And then talking specifically about ISKCON, in our Krishna consciousness movement, we have recommended that the neophyte chant at least 16 rounds. This chanting of 16 rounds is absolutely necessary if one wants to remember Krishna. Of all the regulative principles, the spiritual master's order to chant at least 16 rounds is most essential. So you can see the emphasis, practically 5 sentences here. The emphasis is on chanting the holy names. Okay, so of course, we know very well that Srila Prabhupada's great success in spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world was his faith in chanting the holy names. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada said that in his poem Markane Bhagavad Dharma, that that's the only qualification which he basically said he had, and that was faith in the holy names. And so therefore, that instruction of Srila Prabhupada to chant at least 16 rounds is something which is, as Prabhupada says here, absolutely necessary, absolutely necessary. And he has said that the spiritual master's order to chant at least 16 rounds is most essential. And so therefore, I think so there cannot be a greater emphasis on the chanting of the holy names as we see in this purport over here. And so therefore, taking into consideration Srila Prabhupada's emphasis on this, on the chanting of at least 16 rounds, definitely, I think so we should give this top priority in our practices of devotional service. And whatever we give top priority obviously means that we do that first in the day. That means in the morning. So therefore, this cannot be, the chanting of the holy names cannot be underestimated and cannot be prioritized less, taking into consideration Srila Prabhupada's great emphasis on it. And so therefore, it is something which is very, very essential that we give top priority to the chanting of the holy names, though sometimes there is a tendency to not give the chanting so much a priority because it is something which is which we think we are not so accountable to, especially in terms of quality of the chanting. And so therefore, but we should understand that this is what the Acharya has emphasized, and so that has to be our emphasis and our priority also. And so therefore, it is very important that at least 16 rounds we keep time exclusively. That means without combining it with some other activities, no multitasking along with chanting of the holy names, no mobile calls and downloading emails and so many other things that may take place along with the chanting of the holy names. So nothing like that, but then absolute priority to the chanting of the holy names and give exclusive time for the chanting of the holy names, and then also try to improve the quality of the chanting. This is something which Srila Prabhupada is saying absolutely necessary if one wants to remember Krishna and not forget him. And then if we do this, then while we are rendering all other services, whether, as Srila Prabhupada is saying, whether it is selling books or enlisting life members or any other service, even if you're doing our jobs and business, whatever it may be, then there's a good chance that during that time, we will also be able to remember Krishna and be in that consciousness that I'm actually doing this service for pleasing Krishna. Okay, so that is the essence of our practices of sadhana bhakti. Now, Srila Prabhupada is writing the same points in the book. So now we'll read from the book. So in my book, it's page number 23, the second last paragraph. So you may see that in the Padma Puran also, the same process is advised. Somebody can read, please.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. In the Padma Purana also, the same process is advised. There it is said that one should always remember Lord Vishnu. This is called dhyana or meditation, always remembering Krishna. It is said that one has to meditate with his mind fixed upon Vishnu. Padma Purana recommends that one always fix his mind on the form of Vishnu by meditation and not forget him at any moment. And this state of consciousness is called samadhi or trance. We should always try to mold the activities of our lives in such a way that we will constantly remember Vishnu or Krishna. This is Krishna consciousness. Whether one concentrates his mind on the four-handed form of Vishnu or on the form of two-handed Krishna, it is the same. The Padma Purana recommends somehow or other always think of Vishnu without forgetting him under any circumstances. Actually, this is the most basic of all regulative principles. For when there is an order from a superior about doing something, there is simultaneously a prohibition. When the order is that one should always remember Krishna, the prohibition is that one should never forget him. Within this simple order and prohibition, all regulative principles are found complete.
Okay, fine. So Srila Prabhupada writes this important statement here. We should always try to mold the activities of our lives in such a way that we will constantly remember Vishnu or Krishna. That is Krishna consciousness. Okay, so basically Krishna consciousness means to be always conscious of Krishna at all times. And so therefore we need to mold our lives, modify our lives, modify our lifestyles in such a way that we are able to remember Krishna. Okay, and then that could be something which each one of us individually have to see as to what is the best way in which I can remember Krishna, because ultimately that is our individual responsibility, because ultimately it is I who have to remember Krishna, it is I who have to purify myself, it is I who need to go back to Godhead. So ultimately it is my responsibility to see that I'm able to remember Krishna, and how we can effectively mold our lives in order to do so. That's something which each one of us can think for ourselves. And then Srila Prabhupada writes, this regulative principle is applicable to all varnas and ashrams, the castes and occupations of life. So this principle, to always remember Vishnu, not forget him, is applicable to all varnas and ashrams. That is the purpose of all varnas and ashrams, as in the Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, second chapter. Also it is stated, Atha Pumbi Dvajashreshta Varnashrama Vibhagasha Swanushtidasya Dharmasya Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. The purpose of all varnas and ashramas is ultimately to please Krishna. And then Prabhupada names the four varnas and ashramas, and at the end of that paragraph he says, the principle of remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead constantly and not forgetting him at any moment is meant to be followed by everyone without fail. Okay, so if that ultimate goal of remembering Vishnu is not followed by the various varnas and ashramas, then actually it is called as Asurik Varnashram. We will just see that quote in a moment. So, and then Prabhupada writes, if this injunction is followed, then all other rules and regulations will automatically fall into line. All other rules and regulations should be treated as assistants or servants to this one basic principle. And then Prabhupada essentially describes of the 4 varnas and 4 ashramas. So we won't read all that because I'm sure that must have been covered in the Bhagavad Gita. And okay, so again, this is a famous verse from the 2nd canto of the Bhagavatam. Etavan Sankhya Yoga Bhyam Swadharma Parinishthaya Janmalabha Parapumsam Ante Narayana Smriti. The highest perfection of human life achieved either by complete knowledge of matter and spirit, by practice of mystic powers, or by perfect discharge of occupational duty is to remember the personality of Godhead at the end of life. Everyone is anxious to achieve the highest perfection of this particular activity, and it is indicated herein that such perfection is Narayana Smriti, for which everyone must endeavor his best. In other words, life should be molded in such a manner that one is able to progressively remember the personality of God in every step of life. So you see, Prabhupada is writing a similar statement over here also. Life should be molded in such a manner that one is able to progressively, that means that remembrance of Krishna has to increase as we progress in our devotional life. That remembrance is supposed to increase. So that we have to see how we can increase that remembrance of Krishna. And that means increase in our chanting, the quality of our chanting, our reading, our hearing, and trying to remember Krishna during our various services. So this has to progressively increase. There has to be progress. Then that's advancement. Advancement in Krishna consciousness means advancement in remembrance of Krishna. That's basically what is meant by advancement. So it's not simply the number of years that one passes. So therefore, that remembrance of Krishna has to increase progressively. Yes, so talking about Varnashram, we already quoted this verse from the first canto, 2nd chapter, verse number 13. And then this is a quotation from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which says, Chari Varnashrami yadi Krishna nahi haje, swakarma karite se raurava padi haje. The followers of the Varnashram institution accept the regulative principles of the 4 social orders, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and 4 spiritual orders, Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. However, if one carries out the regulative principles of these orders but does not render transcendental service to Krishna, he falls into hellish condition of material life. Okay, so one is simply following the injunctions of Varna and Ashram, but the essential goal is not remembrance of Krishna. Then without that remembrance of Krishna, it is said here that one simply goes into hellish life, Raurava, one of the hellish planets. So therefore, the purpose of Varnashram is ultimately to satisfy Krishna, to remember Krishna. And so this is a similar point, which is there in the 11th canto. From the mouth of Brahma, the Brahmanical order has come into existence. Similarly, from his arms, the Kshatriyas have come. From his waist, the Vaishyas have come. From legs, Shudras have come. His 4 orders and the spiritual counterparts, Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas, combine to make human society complete. If one simply maintains an official position in the 4 varnas and ashramas, but does not worship the Supreme Lord Vishnu, he falls down from his puffed up position into a hellish condition. It's a similar point. Okay, this is from the book itself, but still we can read. Okay, somebody can read from the screen. Let's run the book only.
Hare Krishna. If the whole society performs its respective duties and remains in Krishna consciousness, there is no doubt that all of its members will live peacefully and happily. Without wanting the necessities of life, the whole world will be turned into Vaikuntha, a spiritual abode. Even without being transformed to the kingdom of God, by following the injunctions of Srimad Bhagavatam and prosecuting the duties of Krishna consciousness, all human society will be happy in all respects.
Okay, so if everyone performs their duties, that means Varnashram duties, and then remains in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada is saying there is no doubt that all of its members will live very peacefully and happily. Okay, so that applies to us individually and collectively. The more we remain in Krishna consciousness, that means the more we are trying to please Krishna, serve Krishna, keep Krishna in the center of our lives, then even while remaining here in this world, Prabhupada says, we can turn it into a Vaikuntha, a spiritual abode. So what's essentially the most important thing is to be Krishna conscious, to know that the purpose of life is to please Krishna, to act in ways that will satisfy Krishna. So if one is Krishna conscious individually and collectively, then even while remaining in this world, one can actually turn this place into Vaikuntha. Okay, read this also.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thus, the Krishna conscious movement is so nice that there is no need of even designating oneself Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, or Sannyasi. Let everyone be engaged in whatever occupation he now has. Simply let him worship Lord Krishna by the result of his activities in Krishna consciousness. That will adjust the whole situation and everyone will be happy and peaceful within this world. Thank you.
Okay, so here Srila Prabhupada is giving a very practical understanding of the application of an ashram. So sometimes, even as devotees, sometimes there's a lot of confusion as to who's Brahmana, who's Kshatriyan, and so on and so forth. So Srila Prabhupada, many times he spoke about this in his lectures also, that in the present age of Kali Yuga, it's very difficult to understand who's Brahmana, Kshatriya, because nobody is undergoing any sanskaras and all that. And so therefore, basically, Kalo Shudra Sambhava, everyone is born a Shudra. And so therefore, it is very difficult to understand who is exactly Brahmana, Kshatriya, and so on. And so therefore, Srila Prabhupada would very often quote this verse again from Brahmaji's prayers, which was also quoted by Ramananda Rai in the conversation with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The sthane sthita shrutigatam tanuvan manobhi. So Srila Prabhupada quoted this verse very often to say that, okay, it does not matter which position you are in or what you're doing in this world, whatever may be the varna and ashram is not so important. So just continue performing your duties in this world. And Srila Prabhupada in his lectures brings it down to a down-to-earth level. And Srila Prabhupada would say, it doesn't matter. If you're a doctor, you continue your practice as a doctor. If you're an engineer, you continue your work as an engineer, architect, lawyer, whatever it is. You continue your work, but be Krishna conscious. Be Krishna conscious. And what it essentially means, as Srila Prabhupada is saying over here, so let everyone be engaged in whatever occupation he now has. Okay, so he now has, that's not so important. But simply let him worship Lord Krishna by the result of his activities in Krishna consciousness. Okay, so whatever one may be doing, then worship Krishna, remember Krishna, that will adjust the whole situation and everyone will be happy and peaceful with this world. So that's the practical application of an ashram in present day society, which Srila Prabhupada is giving over here, and Srila Prabhupada has spoken about in many of his lectures. So that's so therefore ultimately the entire goal of the Varnashram and as devotees for every individual person is to ultimately come to the platform of always remembering Krishna and not forgetting him. Then that's the perfection of our practices of devotional service. So that's the end of this second chapter. Any questions or clarifications or comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam.
No, Hare Krishna.
Always I am confused with this. It says always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. What is the difference in the two?
Okay, what's the difference? As Srila Prabhupada is explaining here in the book, that when the order is that, okay, when there is an order from a superior about doing something, there is simultaneously a prohibition. When the order is that one should always remember Krishna, the prohibition is that one should never forget him. So when there is something positive told, then when the negative also is told, that is a prohibition, then it becomes very clear. Otherwise, one could think that, okay, one should always remember Krishna. That is clear. But within that remembrance also, there is a possibility of somebody thinking that maybe, as we saw in the commentary to the verse, that, okay, remembrance means within the 24 hours, at least some parts of the day, remembrance of Krishna. So one can always find some loopholes if only the positive aspect is told. Always remember Krishna. Okay, always means that, okay, 24 hours, sometimes in 24 hours. So one can always find loopholes. And therefore, just to emphasize that, no, never forget him. Okay, so then it sort of emphasizes that no, there is no scope for forgetting. Okay, so when there is something positive told and at the same time the negative aspect is also told, then it re-emphasizes the positive. When the negative is also told, then it re-emphasizes the positive. I'm just thinking of another example to illustrate this.
There was one more example, Prabhuji, earlier, for a diabetic, have medicines but do not eat sugar, sweets. In one more context, Prabhupada had used it. I think it was in Ishopanishad, or was it in...
Say that again, please, a little louder.
Like for a person who is diabetic, a doctor will prescribe medicines, that is the haves, and do not eat sweets, that is the have not. So if you eat if you eat medicine but you also eat sweet, then it's not going to help you, and it can deteriorate your condition. But because you're having medicine and along with that you're not having sweet, then it will ensure that you're in good health. So that was an example Prabhupada had used.
Yes, that's a standard example which the Prabhupada would often give about the medicine and the diet. But those are two different things in the sense that one needs to take the medicine and one needs to follow the diet. So those are two different things. Of course, there is a positive aspect, there's a positive injunction, and there's a prohibition. Yes, so that's an example which the Prabhupada did often give. But here, it appears to be very similar. Always remember, never forget.
Remember Krishna and never forget Krishna.
Yes, this appears similar. But again, the point is for the same purpose, and that is emphasis. So always remember Krishna. And then just so that one does not think that there may be sometimes I can forget. So just to make sure that one's clear on that point. So it's also said never forget.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
I have a doubt, Prabhuji. You said there are 3 types of Uttama Bhakti: Sadhana Bhakti, Bhava Bhakti, and Prema Bhakti. Prabhuji, after Bhava comes Prema Bhakti, right? Devotional service in pure love. Why is it Bhava Bhakti given as a separate type of Uttama Bhakti? Because Prema Bhakti being the highest, it can just be Sadhana Bhakti and Prema Bhakti, right?
No, but these are 3 stages. So there is sadhana, and then one comes to the stage of bhava, which is the beginning of prema, as we'll discuss that in our further classes. But bhava bhakti is also one stage. So just like you have studied the nine stages of bhakti. Yes, the 9
so
stages
it should
of
have
bhakti.
Ideally come in sadhana bhakti, right, Prabhuji?
No, because as we'll be studying, bhava bhakti is also on the pure platform, transcendental platform, where Shuddha Sattva begins to enter into the heart of the devotee. So it is on the liberated platform. So it's also called as Prema Ankura. It is the beginning of Prema. And so therefore it cannot be included within sadhana bhakti.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Anything else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dhamma Pranam.
Yes.
Prabhuji, just now we discussed that Krishna consciousness is always above Varnashrama system, right? But Prabhupada, in his personal time, where he always emphasized Krishna consciousness, but I heard in my lecture that he wants Varnashrama system to be established along with Krishna consciousness. So that's what Prabhupada desired. So so how to understand this,
Yes.
Prabhupada, Prabhuji? So we should emphasize
Yes.
when we ask, or we should establish Varnashrama, it should go parallel.
Yes. So when one is situated in the Varnashram, that is basically one is working according to one's propensities, then one can very stably practice devotional service. But then the important question is, especially in regards to the Varnas, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, but in the current age, how are we to designate somebody as Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra? On what basis can we designate? So therefore, and already most people, when they come into Krishna consciousness, most people are already into their different occupations and different professions. So then what are we going to do with that? So therefore, Srila Prabhupada would very often say in his lectures that the whole society is topsy-turvy. It's actually very difficult to establish ideal Varnashram society, though we can try, especially within the society of devotees, maybe we can try. But to establish an ideal Varnashram society is definitely very challenging. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada would say that, and as we just read now, that, okay, it doesn't matter, whatever you're doing, continue doing it, but at the same time be Krishna conscious, because that is our ultimate goal. So if we try to restructure people's lives, tell them to change occupations and things like that, of course, if somebody is able to do it, well and good. But if somebody is not able to do it, then it's not that one becomes disqualified for Krishna consciousness. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada practically said, okay, it doesn't matter what you're doing, just be Krishna conscious. That is the answer. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Very purpose of Varnashrama Dharma is defeated there, isn't it, Prabhuji?
Meaning?
Meaning now Brahmanas are not, they are doing some administrative, they are not doing this Vedas, they are not studying Vedas or something like that. Shudras are not doing the farming work, they are in some company or something like that. Then the very purpose of divide, first it was divided like this. Then there was no need for Varnashrama Dharma. It looks like that for me. In Kali Yuga, it is not before I told. In Kali Yuga, it seems like that.
See, the Varnashrama has been given by the Supreme Lord himself, correct? Yeah. So why he has given that? So that, because if everyone is told to directly come to the platform of pure devotional service, then, because what is pure devotional service? As we defined it right in the beginning. Pure devotional service means one simply has to do what Krishna wants one to do.
Anukulian.
Correct. Whatever Krishna orders, whatever Krishna desires, that is pure devotional service. So that means if today one may be told to do pujari work, tomorrow one may be told to sweep the floor. So one should be ready for anything. That is ideal Krishna consciousness, just what Krishna wants. But then, because we may not be so surrendered initially, we have our propensities, we have our likes and dislikes. And so therefore, Krishna has designed the Varnashram in such a way that according to one's propensities, why different people have different propensities? because everyone is influenced by the modes, right? Guna karma vibhagasha. So based upon the influence of the gunas, the modes, therefore different people have different propensities. And because different people have different propensities, then Krishna has devised a way by which one can engage one's propensities in Krishna's service. So that becomes easier, isn't it? So that is the purpose of an ashram. So then one has certain propensities, certain likes and dislikes. Okay, no problem. You like to do the work of a brahmana. You want to teach. Okay, you teach or you do some brahmanical work. But at the same time, you do it for the pleasure of Krishna. You offer the fruits to Krishna. And then that's how one progresses in devotional service. Or if one has administrative capabilities, okay, you do that work. But at the same time, do it for Krishna. So in this way, when one is engaged according to one's propensities, then it becomes easier for one to work for Krishna and then progress. So because absolute pure devotional service means, okay, you forget your propensities, whatever order Krishna gives, you do that. That is on the highest platform, but that is difficult for everyone because initially one is influenced by the modes. So therefore, Krishna has devised the system by which people can engage their propensities in Krishna's service and then gradually progress. The principle still remains, even now. Even now, the principle still remains. But things are not so systematically being followed. Now also the 4 classes do exist. Now also we find that some people are definitely more Brahmanical. They want to study, they want to teach. So we find there are some class of people like that. There are a class of people who are administrators. There are a class of people who want to do farming and trade. But unfortunately, the current day society, as Srila Prabhupada has explained so many times in his lectures, current day society, most people are Shudras. There are a few Vaishyas. There are practically no Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. So that is the current day society. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada wanted to create at least a class of Brahmanas within the society. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada, in many lectures, he says that within the Krishna consciousness movement, one of the most important aims is to create a class of Brahmanas who are like the head, who can give some direction to society. And so therefore, that was the important goal that Srila Prabhupada was trying to achieve through the Krishna consciousness movement. So otherwise, to bring society to an ideal varnashram situation is quite challenging. It's quite challenging because already people are into so many things. So therefore, then Srila Prabhupada gave something which is very practical. Okay, you don't have to change your occupation and do so many changes and things like that. Doesn't matter. So whatever occupation you're doing, you do it, but at the same time be Krishna conscious. And does it help?
Yeah. It is more fully linked to the caste now, isn't it? In the society, Brahmanas.
That's the degraded varnashram system. So that's not degraded, actually, it's a perverted system. The caste system is a perverted system. So that is basically based on birth. The caste system is based on birth, but varnashram is not based on birth. Varnashram is based on guna karma vibhagasha. It is based upon the influence of the gunas and the karma what one is doing. The caste system is entirely based on birth. So it's a perverted varnashram.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare. Okay.
Prabhuji, Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Prabhuji, I'm little still in doubt about this Bhava Bhakti and Prema Bhakti. I don't know if it's the right time. Prabhuji, as far as my understanding is, it talks about Uttama Bhakti. But in Bhava Bhakti, there is still some kind of anarthas or impurities there. So how come it is given under Uttama Bhakti?
See, first of all these 3 are all Uttama Bhakti. Sadhana, Bhava, Prema, all these are different stages of Uttama Bhakti.
Okay.
Because what is the goal? The goal is, as we have been discussing, the goal is to please Krishna. So they're just different stages. So therefore, all are different stages of Uttama Bhakti. So, and at the level of Sadhana Bhakti, one is practicing, one is still not perfect. One is practicing, or as Srila Prabhupada said, it is apprenticeship. one is still in the training period. But just like there is an engineer, so there's an engineer who initially when he joins a company, so initially is given training, correct?
Yes, Prabhuji.
So that time is he called engineer or no? Or you call him something?
Not officially, but in the process of becoming.
Exactly, but he may have finished his BTech, MTech, so obviously he's an engineer, correct? But still he is undergoing training first. He's an engineer.
Okay.
So similarly, even on the path of sadhana bhakti, he is undergoing training, but he is still a bhakta. He is still, it's the process of uttama bhakti, but it is just the initial stage. And then as he progresses, then he comes to bhava bhakti and then prema bhakti. So bhava is the initial stage of prema, and then prema is full-fledged, okay, where there's total pure love. And bhava is the beginning of that. So these are all various stages of uttama bhakti.
Yeah, that means I can be okay if I am in Baba stage. Is it correct way of understanding?
Yes, why not? What's wrong with that?
Prabhuji, but the rasa develops in prema bhakti, right, Prabhuji?
Okay, don't get into too many complications now. So as of now, I think so we can just be happy to know that there are 3 stages, sadhana, bhava, and prema. Okay, so more details we'll discuss later. Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandat Pranam.
Yes.
Prabhuji, actually in present condition, one should be very flexible in Krishna conscious, right, Prabhuji? That is your saying, Prabhuji. That is, if one need, I mean, in certain condition, if one need to act like a Kshatriya, he need to act. Right, Prabhuji?
See, as far as we are concerned within Krishna consciousness, we perform duties as instructed by the spiritual master and spiritual authorities. So that is how we act. So as far as we are concerned, that is the basis of whatever we do. Our purpose in life is to please the spiritual master, and our duties should be in accordance to his instructions.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yes, Prabhuji. But still now I'm confused about this Varnashrama, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, now you said that if it is needed, you need to do any kind of work, right, Prabhuji?
Yes,
in Krishna
but then we
consciousness.
already clarified that right in our definition of pure devotional service, where when we said Anushilanam, Anu means what? Following the predecessor Acharya, so following the instructions of the spiritual master. So that is pure devotional service. Pure devotional service means following the instructions of the Acharyas, following the instructions of the spiritual master, and it has to be anukulyena, it has to be favorable to our practice of devotional service. So essentially, the principle that we always follow is Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasadu. So we have to please the spiritual master. That is the basis of whatever we do. And so therefore, if we are given an instruction to do a particular service, whatever that may be, whatever you may call it, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, whatever. But if that's an instruction which we are receiving, and so then we must be ready to do that.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank
Hare
you so much. Hare Krishna.
Okay, so I think so now we can proceed to the next chapter. So the third chapter is eligibility of the candidate for accepting devotional service. So again, the points here are slightly repeated.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, the
So here,
slides are still.
Okay. All right.
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Okay, fine. So this verse is being repeated here. We already discussed this. Yadrichaya matkatado jata shraddhastu ya pumana nirbinno nati sutto bhakti yoga sasiddhaha. If somehow or other by good fortune one develops faith in hearing and chanting my glories, such a person being neither very disgusted with nor attached to material life should achieve perfection through the path of loving devotion to me. So Rupa Goswami is quoting this verse from the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam. So now this verse is also being quoted. This is from the first canto of the Bhagavatam. Suta uvacha evam sambhashya bhagavan narado vasavi sutam amantriya veenam ranayan yayau yadrichiko muni. Suta Goswami said, thus addressing Vyasdev, Srila Narad Muni took leave of him, and vibrating on his veena instrument, he left to wander at his free will. So the important word here again, just like in the previous verse, we saw that word yadrichaya. So similar word is being used over here, yadrichiko, wherever willing. So that is Narad Muni's will. Wherever he wills, he can move around. So this is purport to that. Please read.
Hare Krishna Guruji. Eligibility of the candidate for accepting devotional service. Every living being is anxious for full freedom because that is his transcendental nature. And this freedom is obtained only through the transcendental service of the Lord. We can just imagine the extent and unlimitedness of his freedom, which is as good as that of the Supreme Lord. There is no reason or obligation for his traveling, and no one can stop him from his free movement.
Continue, please.
Similarly, the transcendental system of devotional service is also free. It may or may not develop in a particular person even after he undergoes all the detailed formulas. Similarly, the association of the devotee is also free. One may be fortunate to have it, or one may not have it even after thousands of endeavors. Therefore, in all spheres of devotional service, freedom is the main pivot.
Okay, so here Srila Prabhupada is making this important point that, so just like Narad Muni, it's mentioned here, the Yadrichiko. That means he's free. He's free to move around and be an agent of Krishna's mercy. Vishwanath Thakur explains this point in the Madhurika Dimini, that Krishna's policy is that his mercy follows the devotee's mercy. That is how Krishna functions. So Krishna doesn't give his mercy directly to anyone. The distributors of his mercy are the devotees. So now, as far as the devotees are concerned, the preacher devotees who are distributors of Krishna's mercy. Now, why Narad Muni goes to a certain candidate to give his mercy? There's no why to that. So Narad Muni finds somebody favorable, he goes there. Okay, so he saw that there are 10,000 sons of Daksha, very favorable. He goes and preaches to them. Or he sees King Prachin Barishad, he goes and preaches. He finds Mrigari, Valmiki, Dhruva, Prahlad. So if we were to ask the question to Narad Muni, why did you go to this person? Why didn't you go to some other person? Why you went here? No, there's no why to that. Well, somehow the Paramatma inspired him to go to that candidate, and he offered him devotional service. And then Krishna's mercy follows. So therefore, Prabhupada is making the point here, the association of the devotee is also free. One may be fortunate to have it, or one may not have it, even after thousands of endeavors. So therefore, you find this word constantly being used. Yadrichaya, Yadrichiko, Kona Bhagyavana Jeev. You find these words again and again repeated in the Shastra. So therefore, there is no why as to why one person has received devotional service, why another person did not receive devotional service. There's no why. So just like we know there was Srila Prabhupada's friend, Narendra, who inspired Srila Prabhupada, literally dragged him, as Prabhupada himself says, literally dragged him to meet Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But that Narendra, we don't hear about him. What happened to him, we don't know. So then both went to meet Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Why only Srila Prabhupada became such an advanced devotee? Why his friend did not? Well, there's no answer to that. So therefore, the point is that if somebody somehow comes to devotional service, then he has to be considered as Bhagyavan. He has to be considered as fortunate. That's all. There's no further reasoning behind it. So we just have to accept that somehow or other, therefore the word yadrichya. Yadrichya means somehow or other. Somehow or other, some fortunate soul gets Krishna consciousness. That's it. Okay, so the eligibility
Prabhu,
is, yes. Somebody saying something?
Prabhuji, sorry for that. Is that karma of our peers' activities will not also impact, Prabhu? It will definitely impact, right? That's current.
Okay, just hold on. We'll come to that discussion.
Okay.
Okay, so, but the basic point here is, that it is, if one gets Krishna consciousness, then one is to be considered as fortunate. And so there is no, the only reason for the practice of devotional service is bhakti itself. There is no other cause. So now Rupa Goswami is quoting this other verse, or rather this is his verse. Ya kenapi ati bhagyena jata shraddhosya sevane nati sakto na vairagya bhag asyam adhikarya so. So this is very similar to the 11th canto verse. The person who has developed faith in serving the Lord by impressions arising from previous association with devotees, who is not too attached to material objects and who is not too detached, is qualified for Vaidhi Bhakti. Okay, so here if you see the various aspects of this verse, one word is ati bhagyena, as we have been making the point. So if somebody somehow gets the association of devotees, he is to be considered ati bhagyena, very fortunate. So because of that association of devotees and serving the devotee, sevane, what happens? He develops shraddha, jata shraddho. So the cause for getting bhakti is the association of devotees. There is no other cause. There is no other cause for bhakti. The only cause for receiving bhakti is the association of devotees. So now why somebody got the association of devotee, why somebody else did not get, there is no question. There is no answer to that. There is no answer to that question, why somebody got the association of devotee. So previous karma is not responsible for this. Material karma has nothing to do with devotional service. Material karma is never the cause of devotional service. The cause of devotional service is only devotional service. So therefore, even in the last chapter discussion, we were making the same point, or rather the acharyas explained the same point, that the only cause for devotional service is the causeless mercy of a devotee. That is the only cause. Causeless mercy of a devotee. That is all. So because of the causeless mercy of a devotee, one somehow gets in touch with devotional service. That's all. Okay. So somehow one gets in touch with devotional service, and then one may take it up seriously, and then one makes progress. But the cause of devotional service is only one, and that is the association with devotees. And in that association, one performs some service, then he develops some attraction, and that's how he progresses. but the only cause is the association of devotees. So material punya is never the cause of devotional service. So this point should be very clear. And then the favorable qualifications for receiving that devotional service from devotees is nati sakto na vairagya bhav, or as we saw in the 11th canto verse, na nirvinno nati sakto, not too detached, not too attached. So those are favorable situations, favorable qualifications to accept devotional service. Okay, so 4 things are mentioned in the above verse: ati bhagyena, shraddhasya, nati sakto, vairagya. So we already discussed these points. And then Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says, if one is too attached to sense gratification, he becomes eligible for karma kand. One is disgusted with sense objects and he becomes eligible for gyan. One is attached to a mahatma, then he becomes eligible for bhakti.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Prabhuji, in the previous slide, there is that previous association. What does it mean?
Yes. So previous association means that a previous association, it could be association in this life, it could be association in previous life, whatever it is. The cause is association. So somehow, ati bhagyena, yadrichaya, somehow or other, one has come in contact with devotees. So when one comes in contact with devotees, then his devotional service begins. That contact with devotees could be in the form of Harinam Sankirtan, hearing the holy names. It could be in the form of receiving prasadam, receiving a book, or any form of devotional service. So somehow one gets the association of devotee at some point of time. And then when one gets that association, then his devotional service begins.
Okay, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.
All right.
Prabhuji? Prabhuji, you told the example of Srila Prabhupada and Naren. Both of them had causeless mercy. They both meant Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But what is it that that Srila Prabhupada was fortunate enough to get the pure devotional service and Naren did not get? If you're saying that causeless mercy is the main thing, that is it not something, the role of faith not there in it, Prabhuji?
Yes. So both of them met, and definitely the friend also definitely got seed of devotional service somehow due to previous impressions, due to previous conditionings. So that didn't, you could say, didn't sprout, or he could not make so much advancement. Definitely by the association, his devotional service definitely has begun. Now, different people make progress. We discussed this point in the previous class also, that different people make progress based upon the practice of devotional service in the previous life. Okay. So 2 people may begin devotional service, but we find somebody makes more progress, somebody makes less progress. And that is based upon previous devotional impressions and previous devotional practices that one has had. So 2 people may appear to come to devotional service at the same time, but one may make more progress because maybe he has already done 50% in the previous life. And then devotional service begins from that point. So then he makes more rapid progress. More rapid progress means his attraction to devotional service is much more because of the previous practices of devotional service. And so though apparently 2 people come to devotional service at the same time, but we find the different rate of progress because of previous practices of devotional service.
So Prabhuji, that means I can say that qualification to get devotional service is association of devotees and not neither too attached or too detached from this material life. Yes. Is it okay, Prabhuji? That
yes,
there's no role of faith in it?
No, that
because
association leads to faith.
Okay. Okay.
The beginning of, you have studied the nine stages of devotional service, isn't it? What is the first stage?
Yes. Shraddha.
Adav Shraddha.
Yeah,
so what happens when one associates with devotees? In the association of devotees, one receives faith. That is what one receives.
Okay.
And therefore here it is said, ya kenapi atibhagyena jata shraddho. So the shraddha develops because of the association. And then as one associates more with those who have faith, one's faith increases. That's essentially what happens as we progress in devotional service. The faith increases.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is this point clear? Okay, fine. So now, on the basis of that faith, then we have the classification of devotees, because that's foundational. Faith and knowledge are foundational to our practices of devotional service. The more faith and knowledge we have, then the more we practice devotional service with great conviction. So eligibility of the candidate for advancing in devotional service. So then on the basis of faith and knowledge, then the devotees are classified into Kanishta, Madhyam, and Uttam. And so I'm sure this discussion of Kanishta, Madhyam, and Uttam has been discussed in the Nectar of Instruction. Yes, somebody can answer. Yes. Has it been discussed in detail in the Nectar of Instruction? Yes, because that's a...
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, fine. So then we are not repeating all of that. So we're just going through some basic points again as a revision. So we know these points. Kanishta, the faith is weak. The knowledge is also weak. He cannot offer arguments to oppose opinion. Madhyama, he is more convinced. So he himself is convinced. His practices are strong. Knowledge is good, but can't always defeat opposing opinion. Uttama, both strong and convinced. Knowledge is also strong and convinced others. And then we know the definition of faith. Shraddha, Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kohe Sudrudha Nishtay, Krishna Bhakti Kaile Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. Shraddha is confident, firm faith that by rendering transcendental loving service to Krishna, one automatically performs all subsidiary activities. Such faith is favorable to the discharge of devotional service. Faith means conviction that the goal of life is to please Krishna and abandon all other desires. Okay, so to the degree one has faith, one is convinced that my only business in life is to please Krishna, nothing else. Nothing else matters in life. My only business is to please Guru and Krishna, that's all. And that was the faith and conviction which Srila Prabhupada had. And that is what inspired him to follow the instructions of his spiritual master so rigidly, making the instructions of the spiritual master's very life and soul. And that's the reason for his success. Okay, so now we'll read a few points about each of these categories. So somebody can read.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Neophyte devotee, Kanishta Adhikari, eligibility. One whose faith is not very strong, who is just beginning, should be considered a neophyte devotee. Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, 22.6.
Continue, please.
Neophyte devotee, Kanishta Bhagavata, vision. A Prakrita Bhakta or materialistic devotee does not purposefully study the Shastra and try to understand the actual standard of pure devotional service. Consequently, he does not show proper respect to advanced devotees. He may, however, follow the regulative principle learned from his spiritual master or from his family who worship the deity. He is to be considered on the material platform, although he is trying to advance in devotional service. Such a person is a Bhakta Praya, neophyte devotee, or Bhakta Bhasa, for he is a little enlightened by Vaishnava philosophy.
Okay, so basically the Kanishta Bhagavat or the Prakrita Bhakta. So basically his faith is very poor. His faith is very weak. Knowledge is also weak. And so therefore he may worship the deity. Having faith in the deity is something which is easier because the deity is Bhagwan. So one can respect Bhagwan, but then to see the presence of Bhagwan also in the hearts of other living entities, to see other living entities in relationship to the Supreme Lord, that becomes a little more difficult. And so therefore then the Kanishta does not respect and does not have the proper behavior with other devotees. And so that's basically the neophyte devotee. And here it says that he does not even study the Shastras because one may think ignorance is bliss. If I know all the injunctions of the Shastra, then I have to follow them. If I don't follow, I'll feel guilty. So best is don't study the Shastra, don't know it. Know them, that's good. Ignorance is bliss. But Srila Prabhupada also said, ignorance of law is no excuse. Okay, so just one point I want to know. So what is the purpose of this entire classification? Can somebody say? So we find that this classification of devotees into Kanishta, Madhyama, and Uttam is presented in many places in the Shastras. We find it both in the Nectar of Instruction, the Nectar of Devotion. It's also there in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we find this discussion in many places. So what's the purpose? Can somebody say what's the significance?
Prabhupada himself has mentioned that how
Whoever is saying we cannot hear.
Can you hear it, Prabhuji, now?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Prabhupada himself has said in many places that how we treat Uttamadhikari, how we treat Madhyamadhikari, and how we should treat Kanishta Adhikari. A Kanishta Adhikari we should treat with love and should forgive for mistakes, and for Madhyamadhikari we should give respect. I don't remember the exact.
Okay, fine. So you're basically trying to say that the way we deal and the way we behave with different levels of devotees is different. Okay, good point. Anything else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
I'm trying to link where Prahlad Maharaj says, how do we deal with the people? So we should take guidance from the superiors and equals and to elevate those who are juniors. In that sense, this classification works out when we take guidance from the superiors.
Okay, fine. So basically, how we deal with each of these categories is different. That means how we associate with them is different. Okay, that's one point. Are there any other reasons for this classification?
We can know which category we belongs, and we can improve according to that next stage, Prabhuji.
Okay, good. Yes. So yes, that's correct. So we can
offering respects according to their level.
Okay, fine. So basically, yeah, so it's also the classification is very important so that we understand where do I stand. That is very important because I should know where I stand and how I can progress. So yes, so both these points are important. That is, one point is for ourselves to see where I stand, how I can progress. And the other point is for association and dealing with others. Okay, so that's the purpose of the classification. Okay, fine. So that's about the Kanishta. Now we'll read something about the Madhyamadhikari. Please read.
Intermediate devotee, Madhyama Adhikari, eligibility. He who does not know scriptural argument very well, but who has firm faith is called an intermediate or second-class devotee.
Continue.
Intermediate devotee, Madhyama Bhagavata, expanded vision. An intermediate or second-class devotee called Madhyama Adhikari offers his love to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is a sincere friend to all the devotees of the Lord, shows mercy to ignorant people who are innocent, and disregard those who are envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Okay, so these are the four categories that the Madhyamadhikari clearly distinguishes. Okay, Prema, Maitri, Kripa, Upeksha. So he has Prema towards the Lord, Maitri towards the devotees, Kripa towards the innocent, and Upeksha or neglects those who are envious. So that's how the Madhyamadhikari deals with these four categories. And then finally we have the Uttamadhikari. Please read.
Topmost devotee, Uttamadhikari, eligibility, one who is expert in logic and in understanding the revealed scriptures, and who always have firm conviction and deep faith that is not blind, is to be considered a topmost devotee in devotional service.
Yes, faith that is not blind. It is based on the basis, the foundation of Shastra.
topmost devotee, Uttama Bhagavata, most expansive vision, the most advanced devotee sees within everything the souls of all souls, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Consequently, he sees systematically everything in relation to the Supreme Lord and understands that everything that exists is eternally situated within the Lord.
Right. So the Uttam Bhagavat sees Krishna everywhere. As we know the famous verse, Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochina Santa Sadaiva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti Yamsham Sundaramachanti Gunaswarupam Govindamati Purusham Tavam. So that's the Uttam Adhikari because he has prema. So therefore he sees Krishna everywhere. Now, this is also something which has already been covered in Bhagavad Gita. The 4 types of mixed devotees who come to Krishna, Chaturvida Bhajanti Mam Jana Sukrutajana, Artho, Jigyasu, Arthati, Jnanachata. So Rupa Goswami says that these 4 categories, they come under the category of Kanishta Bhaktas. Okay, because they are coming to Krishna with some material motives. So therefore, they have been classified as Kanishtas. So we know the examples for each of these. Artho, Gajendra, Jigyasu, Sejas, and Naimashanya. Arthati is Dhruva Maharaj, and Gyani is 4 Kumaras and Shukdev Goswami. So all these have been put in the category of Kanishtas. So that's so in the 3rd chapter, you can see that this is what Srila Prabhupada is essentially speaking about. And so you can see he speaks about devotees may be divided into 3 classes. So he's speaking about these 3 classes initially, and that's the initial paragraphs. And then if you see page number 30, the 4th paragraph, further classification of the neophyte devotee is made in Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so then he speaks about these 4 classes and he elaborately gives these examples for these 4 classes. And then he's also describing that how in the Gita, Krishna says that amongst these 4, the Jnani is the best because he does not have material desires. He's not seeking an exchange of material benefits. And then further down, then you find this paragraph which you see on the screen. So somebody can read this paragraph without being elevated to the position of a jnani or wise man.
Without eligibility of the candidate for practicing devotional service. Without being elevated to the position.
You can read the same paragraph from the book.
Prabhuji, I don't have the book. I'm just following.
Okay, somebody else can read because
can I read, Mataji? Sir, can I read, Mataji?
Go ahead.
Yes, Prabhuji, please.
Being elevated to the position of a jnani or wise man, one cannot stick to the principle of worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The less intelligent or those whose intelligence has been taken away by the spell of Maya are attached to different demigods on account of the influence of the modes of nature. The wise man is the who has thoroughly understood that he is spirit soul and not simply a body, because he realizes that he is spirit and Krishna is the supreme spirit. He knows that his intimate relationship should be with Krishna, not with this body. The distressed and the man in want of money are in the material concepts of life, because distress and need of money are both in relationship with his body. One who is inquisitive may be a little above the distressed and the man in need of money, but still he is on the material platform. But a wise man who seeks Krishna knows perfectly well that he is spirit soul or Brahman, and that Krishna is the supreme spirit soul or Brahman. He knows that the spirit soul, being subordinate and finite, should always dovetail himself with the infinite and supreme soul Krishna. That is the relationship of the wise man with Krishna. Let's continue, Prabhuji.
I'll read one more time.
Okay, it can be concluded that a person who is freed from the worldly concept of life is an eligible candidate for pure devotional service. It is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita that after Brahman realization, when one is freed from material anxieties and can see every living entity on an equal level, he is eligible to enter into devotional service.
Okay, fine. So basically amongst these four, Srila Prabhupada is explaining that the Jnani is the best because the Jnani, he has perfect knowledge that I'm spirit soul, I'm different from the body, and then there is Parabrahman, the Supreme Lord. So because he has all this knowledge, so therefore he becomes a very favorable candidate for coming to devotional service. Okay, so that's why Krishna also in the Bhagavad Gita says that amongst these four categories, the Jnani is the best because he does not have material desires and he has a perfect realization that I'm not the body, I'm spirit soul. And then Srila Prabhupada speaks about different levels of Brahman realization and three kinds of happiness: material, spiritual, devotional. So this point we had already discussed in our previous discussions. So then you can read the next paragraph after that. However, the perfect spiritual concept of life.
However, the perfect spiritual concept of life is complete knowledge of one's constitutional position, in which one knows enough to dovetail himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. One must know that he is finite and that the Lord is infinite. Thus, it is not possible to actually become one with the Lord, even if one aspires for this. It is simply not possible. Therefore, anyone who has any desire or aspiration for satisfying his senses by becoming more and more important, either in the material sense or in the spiritual sense, cannot actually relish the really sweet taste of devotional service. Srila Rupa Goswami has therefore compared processing these bhakti, material, and mukti, liberation, desires with being influenced by the black art of a witch. In both cases, one is in trouble. Bhakti means material enjoyment and mukti means to become freed from material anxiety and to become one with the Lord. These desires are compared to being hunted by ghosts and witches, because while these aspirations for material enjoyment or spiritual oneness with the Supreme remains, no one can relish the actual transcendental taste of devotional service.
Okay, fine. So here it is Rupa Goswami explains that these desires for bhakti and mukti. So there you can see Srila Prabhupada is speaking about these three kinds of happiness: material, spiritual, devotional. Or so now the material and spiritual, here spiritual refers to Brahmananda, basically the happiness of merging into the impersonal Brahman. So these desires for bhakti means material happiness, and mukti means the desire of liberation, that is merging into the impersonal Brahman. Both have been compared to the black art of a witch or being haunted by a ghost. Why? Because they're causes of trouble. As the Chaitanya Charitamrita verse says, Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kame Sakale Ashanta Krishna Bhakta Nishkama Ateva Shanta. So as long as one has some desire, whether it be material or so-called spiritual, as long as one has some desire, then till the point the desire is not fulfilled, one is in anxiety. So therefore it is said that is ashanta. He cannot be peaceful as long as one has some desire. So therefore, as long as one has some desires, that is the cause of trouble. So just like somebody is haunted by a ghost. So one who is haunted by a ghost is in so much of trouble, so much misery. So similarly, one who has material desires or desire for liberation, it's a cause of misery, because till the point the desire is not fulfilled, one is in so much anxiety. And then we know material desires, even if one material desire is fulfilled, then that leads to unlimited more desires. And therefore, both bhakti and mukti are simply the cause of trouble. And therefore, a pure devotee never desires either material desires of going to the heavenly planets or any other material desires, nor does he have even spiritual desires like merging into the impersonal Brahman. So he only desires to serve the Supreme Lord. That's all. And therefore, immediately in the next paragraph, Srila Prabhupada is quoting Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's famous verse, Nadhanam na janam na sundarim kavitam va jagadish kamaye mama janmani janmanishware bhavatad bhaktir ahaituki. Wait, Prabhupada is going to the translation of that. So by saying Nadhanam na janam na sundarim kavitam, then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying, is denying desires for bhukti, material enjoyment. And by saying Janmani Janmanishware, he is denying the desire for mukti, liberation. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying, I'm ready to come, even life after life, I'm ready to come to this material world. But the only thing I want is devotional service, the desire to serve. That is all what a devotee wants. So therefore, to establish this Siddhanta, that a devotee does not have any other desires other than a desire to serve, no desire for bhukti, no desire for mukti. So now we find Rupa Goswami giving a series of quotes from different scriptures to establish the Siddhanta that a pure devotee does not have any other desires other than desire to serve Krishna. And so therefore, you find all these other quotes now. It's just a series of quotes. You find a quote from by Bilamangal Thakur, then a quote from the third canto by Kapil Dev. And so you find like that, so many quotes, especially from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and this continues on into chapter 4. So the chapter 4 is entitled Devotional Service Surpasses Liberation. That means a devotee does not have even a desire for liberation. And again, it's just a series of quotes to establish the Siddhanta that how a pure devotee does not desire for liberation. So no desire for material things, no desire for liberation. So therefore, you see in the beginning of the 4th chapter, the first quote is a quote from Prithu Maharaj's prayers, where Prithu Maharaj, he prays to the Supreme Lord Vishnu when he appeared in front of him in the sacrificial arena. So he says that I don't have a desire for any material opulence. I don't have a desire for liberation. Okay, what is your desire? He says, my only desire is to have millions of years by which I can simply hear your glories. That's all. Okay. Millions of tongues and millions of years so that I can constantly chant and hear of your transcendental glories. So that's the only desire for a pure devotee. And so you find similar quotes. So the whole chapter is basically a list of various quotes to establish the same Siddhanta that a devotee has no material desires or even a desire for liberation. And so it's just a series of quotes. So you can go through this 4th chapter. And if you have any doubts from this chapter, you can ask in the next class. So basically, it's all a series of quotes. All right. So that's the end of the 4th chapter. And so in our next class, we can begin with the 5th chapter. All right. Any clarifications so far? Okay, fine. So then we'll begin the 5th chapter in our next class on Friday. Okay, so thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srila Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu ki jai, Srila Rupa Goswami Samved Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna,
Thank you,
Hare Hare,
Prabhupada.
Hare Ram, Hare Ram.
Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna.